Welcome to the very first episode of Shape and Sharpen Bible 360. I'm Nick, and if you've landed here, chances are you want to actually read your Bible and understand what it's saying and not feel guilty about not reading it. So first things first, welcome. It's great to have you here, and good on you for being here. So here's what this podcast is. Every single day, we are going to be walking through a short passage of scripture together. And we're going to be following the 360-day Bible reading plan that I've carefully put together to tell the whole story of the Bible. And you can get that 360-day Bible reading plan by going to my website, shapeandsharpen.org. Links are in the show notes and in the caption. Click on the very first gold button that you see at the top of the page, and that will take you to the form where you can enter your email address, and I will immediately send you the Bible reading plan. Now, as I said, this is not like any other reading plan. This is not your usual book-by-book reading plan that goes through the Bible, or just even a normal chronological reading plan. What I've put together here is a reading plan that essentially tells the story of God's redemptive plan, the story of his covenant with his people from start to finish, and in a way that makes sense. So, yes, it's going to be mostly chronological. It's the unfolding plan of God, but the focus is not just on the timing. The focus is on the plan and understanding what God is doing in human history and how his plan of redemption is unfolding. For example, you will see the Psalms scattered around our reading of the Old Testament, so that we are reading the Psalms that David wrote while he was on the run from Saul at the appropriate times in the Old Testament narrative. So you will get to feel all the anxiety and all the emotions that David was feeling while he was on the run. And when we are reading about the unfaithfulness of Israel's kings in 1st and 2nd Kings, we will also be reading at the same time the warnings given to them by the prophets Isaiah, Jeremiah, and others at the same time. Now, the aim of this plan is ultimately to help us not just see when things happened, but why they happened, why it was said and why it was written, and where it all fits into God's story of salvation. The other important thing that I want you to know before we get started is that this is not a seminary lecture, guys. This is more like just two guys sitting around a campfire with the Bible open and saying, okay, what does this actually mean? And what does this have to do with my life? That's the vibe we're going for. And hopefully we're going to maintain that. And hopefully I can explain everything in a simple way that makes sense for everybody. So that you can see that the Bible isn't as intimidating as you thought. So what we're going to do each day, is very simple. I'm going to take your day's reading, which you read at home. And you can then tune in to the show, to the podcast, to the YouTube channel, and follow along with my teaching for that same passage for the day. I will recap the text and explain what happened. And there in this first section, we're going to be simply asking the question, what does it say? And then I'll go through the gospel connections in the text. And here we are asking, what does it all mean? And then lastly, I'll go through some personal applications that came out of the text. And here we are just simply asking, how should I respond? How does what I've read today impact my life and how I live? So that's it, just three simple headings. What does it say? What does it mean? How should I respond? And so the plan is simple. You read the passage at home, and then you fire up this episode and we walk through it together. And if you haven't read it yet, no stress. You can take your time. Or you can still tune in, and I'll cover enough of the passage that you're going to still be able to follow along, even if you haven't read the text that day. But ideally, first prize is read the text yourself, consume the word, be fed with the word, and then as an additional bonus, come and listen to the teaching so that it can help you understand anything that didn't quite make sense. So today, we're starting at the very beginning. This is the first episode. We're doing the first day, Genesis chapter 1 and Genesis chapter 2. So let's kick off with this question. If someone asked you, who are you and why are you here? What would you say? Some people ask this question a little bit differently. They say, what is your purpose? Who are you? And what is your purpose? Well, believe it or not, that's exactly the kind of question that Genesis chapter 1 and chapter 2 is answering. So let's get into it. Firstly, what does it say? Well, Genesis chapter 1, in the beginning, nothing. And then God speaks. He says, let there be light, and there was light. And that sets the tone for everything that follows. Over 6 days, God speaks the universe into existence, out of nothing. Light, sky, land, seas, plants, sun, moon, and stars, fish, birds, and animals. And after each day, God steps back and basically says, yeah, that's good. It's not chaos. It's not accidental. It's ordered. It's intentional. It's deliberate. And there's actually a beautiful structure here that you might not have noticed, but you'll see that on the first 3 days and the second 3 days, those mirror each other. So on day 1, 2, and 3, God creates the spaces. And then on day 4, 5, and 6, he fills those spaces. So on day 1, he creates light. And then on day 4, he fills it with the sun and the moon. On day 2, God separates the sky and the sea. And on day 5, he fills them with birds and fish. On day 3, he makes the dry land and the vegetation. And then on day 6, he fills it with animals. And ultimately, man. And then we get to the big moment, day 6. God says, and notice this, because this is the only time in the whole creation account where he says this. He says, let us make man in our image after our likeness. So it's like there's a pause. There's a kind of divine consultation happening here. The rest of creation, God speaks it. But when it comes to man, it's different. Because man is the crowning achievement. Man is the masterpiece. And he's made in the image of God. The imago Dei, as the theologians call it. That means that man simply is uniquely reflects, uniquely reflects God's character, his rationality, his moral nature, his capacity for relationship, and his authority. God gives man dominion. He gives him authority. He's placed as God's vice-regent, his representative. And he's given the task of ruling over and caring for God's creation. So God then steps back and he rests on the 7th day. But he doesn't rest because he's tired. This isn't God needing a nap, okay? This is more like a craftsman who steps back and admires his finished work and says, that is very good. And that's exactly what we see in verse 31 of chapter 1. And then we go into Genesis chapter 2, which almost in the beginning looks kind of like the same thing as Genesis chapter 1. And in some circles, there's a little bit of confusion. Some guys saying there's 2 different creation accounts, but no, that's not what's happening. What's happening in Genesis chapter 2 is that we're zooming in now on the creation of man. We're getting the detail. God forms the man from the dust of the ground and breathes life into his nostrils. And that is so intimate. That's personal. And then God plants a garden, Eden, and he places the man in the garden to work it and to keep it. So man's given a purpose. He's given a job to do. And then God says something surprising. He says, it's not good for man to be alone. And this is the first time in the whole creation account that God says that something is not good. And so God makes woman, but not from the dust. He makes woman from the man's own side. And when Adam sees her, he basically says the most ancient recorded poetry in human history. And it's basically like, finally, that's the one. And then Genesis chapter 2 ends with this. It ends with the man and his wife, both naked and not ashamed. And so there was peace, there was wholeness, there was harmony, and everything is exactly as it should be. Now, let's talk about the gospel connections here, because this is where it gets interesting. Genesis chapter 1 and chapter 2 is not just a creation account. It doesn't just tell us about the past. It's actually setting up the entire story of the whole Bible. Because I want you to think about it this way. God creates a perfect world. And then he places man, his image bearer, in that world as his representative. And he gives him a purpose, a partner, a home, and one command. And everything at this stage is very good. There's peace between God and man, there's peace between man and woman, and there's peace between man and creation. But we know, and if you've read ahead to chapter 3 already, you definitely know that this is not going to last very long. And the whole rest of the Bible is the story of God's plan to rescue and to restore what gets broken. So now here's the covenant angle of what's happening here. In Genesis chapter 2, you can see the shape of a covenant being formed. God makes a specific arrangement with Adam. These are the terms. You can eat from any tree except for that one. And then there's a condition. And there's a promise implied. And there's a consequence. Theologians call this the covenant of works. Adam is the covenant head. He's the representative of all humanity. So what Adam does, he does for all of us. What Adam receives, he receives for all of us. And the consequences of what Adam does are the consequences for all of us. Because Adam, he represents all of humanity. He's the covenant head. And this is the first hint of why Jesus matters. Because the Apostle Paul in Romans chapter 5 calls Jesus the second Adam. Adam was the first covenant head, and he failed. But Jesus is the second covenant head, the second Adam, and he didn't fail. Where Adam disobeyed, Jesus obeyed perfectly. Where Adam brought death, Jesus brings life. But there's more. The Garden of Eden is actually a picture of what God ultimately wants to restore, and more than restore. The whole Bible ends in Revelation with a new creation, a new heaven and a new earth where God and his people actually dwell together again in perfect peace and harmony forever. So Genesis chapter 1 and chapter 2 is the prototype. It's the template. This is what it was supposed to look like. And the whole story of Scripture is God working out his plan through covenants, through promises, through a chosen people, and ultimately through Jesus Christ to get us back there. The image of God shattered by sin, but it's being restored. Colossians chapter 3 verse 10 says the new man is being renewed in knowledge after the image of him who created him. In Jesus Christ, we get back what Adam lost and more. And so lastly, then let's look at the gospel applications here. What does this mean for how we actually live? Well, first, knowing that you are made in the image of God changes everything about how you see yourself and how you see other people. I mean, you are not an accident. You are not a product of random chance or a product of a random explosion. You are made deliberately, purposefully by the God of the universe who looked at you and said, very good. That's your identity. Your identity is not what you've done. It's not what you failed at. It's not even what you're good at. It's not what other people say about you. Your identity is that you are wonderfully and beautifully made by the creator of the universe. And here's where the gospel comes in, because we know that image got broken by sin. All right, and we feel that every day. We feel the shame, we feel the failure, the falling short. That's nothing new. That goes all the way back to Genesis chapter 3. But the gospel says, in Jesus Christ, that image is being restored. You don't have to perform your way back to God's good graces, guys. The second Adam, Jesus, has already done what the first Adam couldn't do. His perfect obedience is now credited to us by faith. That's the gospel. You see, Adam as our representative head, as our covenant head, he brought the consequence of death on us all. But Jesus Christ, he did what Adam couldn't do. He obeyed the law perfectly. He did everything perfectly. And so his perfect obedience and his perfect righteousness, likewise, is credited to us by faith. That's the gospel. Now, secondly, I want you to notice the creational purpose that God gives man. To work and to keep. Work is not a result of the fall, guys. Work is not bad. Work is good. It's part of what it means to be human being and to be made in God's image. The curse didn't create work. It made work hard. It made work difficult. So whatever you do, your job, your family, your responsibilities, those things are not a distraction from the spiritual life. It is part of your spiritual life and part of your calling. And then finally, the fact that God says it's not good for man to be alone. That is a reminder that we are made for community. We are made for relationship. And ultimately, all that longing for deep and unbroken connection, that's a longing for God. And only the gospel can satisfy it at the deepest level. Only Jesus Christ can satisfy your longing for deep and unbroken connection. Because in Jesus, we are brought back into relationship with the God who made us. So here's the core gospel lesson for Genesis 1 and 2. God is the creator and you are his creation. You were made in his image for his glory and for relationship with him. Now sin broke that, but the story doesn't end there. And the whole Bible is the story of how God, through Jesus Christ, the second Adam, is restoring everything that was lost and more, and bringing us into something even better and greater than the garden. And tomorrow we're going to see exactly how things go wrong, because Genesis chapter 3 is coming and the serpent is going to show up and the whole story takes a devastating turn. But even in the wreckage of the fall, we're going to find one of the most incredible gospel promises in the entire Bible. So you don't want to miss that. Now guys, if you got something out of today's episode, please hit the like button, hit the follow button, hit the subscribe button. Make sure that you are subscribed so that you don't miss a single day of the Shape and Sharpen Bible 360. And if you want to go deeper into the text, make sure you check out the Shape and Sharpen weekly Bible study. That's going to be every Monday on the show, on the podcast, or on the YouTube channel. And the link for everything is going to be in the caption or show notes. It's a weekly Bible study is a more in-depth study that pairs with this podcast. And it's a great tool for small groups and personal Bible study. But there we're starting with Matthew, and we're going to work through the New Testament book by book. So, and if you really want to go all in, come and join the Shape and Sharpen Academy, the monthly community where you'll be able to get all the Bible study materials, the leaders' companions, the community, the children's Bible study lessons, and more. And so that's it for today's episode, guys. See you tomorrow for Genesis chapter 3. Until then, God bless.